Welcome to the Growth Ventures Podcast, the go-to platform for entrepreneurs, innovators, and changemakers. I'm your host, Hamlet Azarian. In this podcast, we delve into the world of business, technology, and innovation. We bring you conversations with industry leaders, disruptors, and visionaries who are shaping the future and making a difference. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a curious listener, join us on the journey of learning and growth. Welcome to the Growth Ventures Podcast. And now, let's delve into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of A Growth Ventures Podcast. I'm your host, Hamlet Azarian. Today, we're thrilled to dive into what it takes to lead like a pro in today's AI-driven world. Joining us is Walter Paulsen, a seasoned entrepreneur, former founder of Blackhawk Network, and a well-respected executive coach with over 25 years of experience. Walter has played roles across diverse industries from e-commerce and fintech to climate tech, achieving multiple successful exits, including one unicorn. Today, Walter shares his journey and expertise on leading sustainable growth, navigating the rapid changes of AI, and fostering resilience and leadership. Whether you're a CEO in tech, an aspiring entrepreneur, or a leader looking to future-proof your business, this conversation is packed with actionable insights. Let's get into it. Walter, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Hamlet. Delighted to join you.
So Walter, I'm going to be referencing a bunch of different topics relating to AI and leadership today. And I think one of the ones I want to kind of jump into right away is about adoption and how to kind of branch out and be able to look as a CEO how you can potentially utilize it. On Moments with Fu, on a podcast that you were on, you discussed how technology can be a game changer if adopted mindfully. And also at our agency, we've seen that even small AI integrations require a careful approach. Could you expand on your perspective on adopting AI without disrupting stability of what's happening overall in the organization?
Sure, it's a great question, and there's always this balance between innovation and operational efficiency, right? Because when you do new stuff, there's an inherent figuring it out piece to it that's not going to be as streamlined as whatever it was that you were doing before. But I think AI is coming on so fast across different areas that the way I encourage CEOs I work with to think about it is, look, they have to start making small bets across multiple areas. If there's something that doesn't align with your core values of your organization, then you don't have to do it. But this can go both ways. You can have a strength that's under attack, and you can look for what are some AI applications that can help protect your strength, or is there a weakness that you'd like to do better, and maybe you can go more aggressively there. But I think the key is you can't bury your head in the sand, and if you don't start to experiment with ways to integrate AI into your business, your competitor is going to be doing it, and eventually they'll eat your lunch. So it's a question, it's not if, it's really when and how, and that's where there's a lot of artistry that needs to happen.
I love that. So it's really, to summarize, it's really finding micro experiments, either on protecting your strengths or overcoming some of the weaknesses you might have in the organization. Probably experiments that are really quick to market and won't cause too much of a disruption, or is it more of a focused team that is sort of your skunkworks team that's adopting this? Is that kind of what you're thinking, or something different?
No, I really don't think it's something that you should have a skunkworks team experimenting on it and then bringing it back to the organization. I think you're much better off having functional areas and leaders who know their domain, try to figure out how to make it work for them. A friend was on a panel at UC Berkeley, where they're trying to figure out how to use AI in law, and I love this description. Person says, like, well, just think of AI as a highly energized, intern on ketamine, and is this guy's like got a lot of energy and they're coming and they want to do stuff and they want to help, but they may hallucinate and come in with some random things. So you kind of need to pay attention to that. And I like that framing because it makes it less, oh my God, the AI is going to come in and take over our things. It's like, no, AI is, think of it as, almost sort of an intelligence or an extension that if you ask it the right questions in the right way, it's really just wants to help you. And I think that's the key is find ways, is it your marketing, your finance, your operations, there's applications throughout the enterprise. And, but the thing you can't do is say, oh, we're good. We're Six Sigma. We operate with best, industry things. We don't need to do this because that's just not going to end well. It might not. It might not end well for 3 or 4 years, but it's not going to end well if
Right.
you don't open up to this kind of change.
I love that. Yeah, we talk about how AI should be a tool that strengthens more or less human collaboration, right? And not
Yep,
something that will replace it. Some variation of that. Amazing.
absolutely.
Okay. The other question I have for you now, like more on tech hesitation, like let's kind of like build off of that. In your episode on Strategic Advisory Board podcast, you mentioned the importance of embracing tech, even if it's unfamiliar. I know we're talking about this right now. You found that leaders are often hesitant to invest in new technology. They don't fully understand. How do you help the CEOs that you're coaching overcome this fear and really start being able to take those minor calculated risks? What do you kind of help them do to not, as you mentioned, put their head in the sand, but really actually get down and figure out what should they do and how should they take the first steps?
Well, generally, very respectfully, I try to hold their hands and tell them not to be such big babies. It's hard because CEOs, especially if they're founders, their capital, their legacy, their ego, their identity, it's all wrapped up in their role leading the business. And they are scared to death that they're going to miss something that's going to bring it all tumbling down. The CEOs have to project competence and swagger and all sorts of things, but it's a lonely job. And most CEOs, if you get them in an honest moment, they are worried about missing something. They're worried about messing up. And right, they have a lot of anxiety. And for the sports minded ones, because I grew up in California and played football, it's like the football teams that, if they get a big lead and then they start playing prevent defense and they're not getting any pressure on the quarterback and they start marching down the field and they let the other team stage a big comeback. And it's like, you just can't get, you can't get conservative when change is coming. You need to lean into it and embrace it. And so that's kind of how I approach it. I mean, and I'm not, now that's not the same thing as saying, oh, you got to bet the company, on AI in every aspect. That's not true. But you can't stick your head in the sand. You can't be a big baby. You can't just keep doing things the way you got to do it. And so you have to find ways to intelligently adapt.
I love that. It reminds me of a famous Drucker quote, right? Like the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act on yesterday's logic. So if you stay in your corals and you don't even see the change coming, there's really no way, you're going to get disrupted. The technology is there, it's available. People are running those micro experiments in other organizations, and they're trying to figure out how to improve overall and boost their productivity.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember um, Jeff Bezos talking about, what risks he saw as things were coming. And he was like, I'm not really worried about, kind of risk from, retail or other like kind of Walmart or Target or Costco. He said, I understand how to deal with those. I'm worried about, some, hungry group of founders that have a great idea and passion and some money. And that because they're focused, they're going to come in and get momentum before I even know they're there, and that they're going to come and hey, right? Because I mean, I remember when Amazon started, it's like, oh, books, yeah, books, maybe some CDs. Oh, that's a cute little company, and it turned out they had a plan to take over the world. And so so I liked his his thing on, you just got to stay alert, and you should always assume, I tell us, is like that there's some hungry competitor who wants to come and take your lunch, because
Right.
I mean, there's awesome things about capitalism. It's the least worst system for people, kind of and economies we've come up with. But you always have to stay hungry and assume when someone's going to come and try and take your lunch.
I love that. Uh, in regards to actually what percentage of their budget they should be investing for R&D or innovation, or what they would be looking at, especially technology that they don't understand, have you seen some CEOs that do this better, and you kind of are able to highlight that? You're like, hey, X percentage of your budget should always be doing this, or what's your general take on this?
So I do not have a hard and fast thing, because I think it really does depend on context. There's certain kinds of fast moving software, biotech, companies, they got to be spending more. On the other hand, I work with some fairly what I call kind of, EBITDA CEOs, that they run construction and construction businesses, security businesses, building trades. They can be, they can be pretty prudent in sort of where they want to use. It may be that they're going to use AI on estimating or compliance or something, whereas there's some tech companies that really need to be investing significantly more. But whatever there, I almost always, and they get tired of me saying this, but as a percentage of revenue, it's going to be quite small. And just look at it as a bet. And then there's going to be an expected payout. And the payout may be operational efficiency. You may do things better, or the payout may be that you got data and information that approach doesn't work. But just place small bets where you're getting either improvements or data about how to improve. And then the real thing is, when you have to make a big bet, you want to have made some smaller bets so you can stack the deck in your favor, right? I mean, it's just like card counting in Vegas. It's like, oh, that deck is full of face cards. It's like, I want to go heavy now. And so you want to do that equivalent of making small bets, getting information, and then when you find something that really can make a differential change, then you make the big investment. But that's kind of the fantasy, is that Silicon Valley is full of people who are making huge risks and betting the company all the time. It's not true. Everybody, from venture capitalists to founders, everybody's trying to de-risk stuff. And it's just, how do you do it intelligently? I think AI is a great way to de-risk, certain kinds of things.
I love that. And I know some of the challenge people have is just they don't want to be overwhelmed, right? At the speed of innovation that's currently happening, with the influx of tools coming, it's also possible that their current team members might not know everything, right? And what guidance would you give leaders to bringing AI into their organization that will be motivating for their teams and not anxiety building or adding stress to them?
Oh, that's a great question. Change is hard. And I just say this, like, there's probably no company that has, from OpenAI to Meta to wherever, there's no company that has all the insights and all the people that they're going to need in order to respond appropriately, to the market. So those companies, don't exist. And, change, change is hard. Whether it at a kind of, stable, relatively stable construction company that can forecast its revenue out, a couple of years, or a Series A, company that's trying to triple revenue in the next 12 months. If you're changing things, people are going to get anxious. And this is where, and this is a little bit less about AI, but this is, I think, where the CEO really has to build a culture that is resilient and welcomes innovation. And in some ways, you have to build a culture where people can get comfortable with discomfort.
I love that. So always more of a like a growth mindset, always looking to learn and evolve and change and
Ab-
elements of that?
Absolutely. You have to have a growth mindset. Even if you have like, kind of a relatively flat industry, you have to have a growth mindset or your share is going to get taken away, right? I mean, you have to be figuring out how to either get more of a growing market or maintain your share, like cut your costs. I mean, and right. I mean, that's the thing. If you're kind of in a stable market without a lot of growth, it's like, well, I mean, um, I've been at companies that were fully mature and didn't really have room for new distribution, and they kind of had there were like only two options, for increasing the value of the company, which was to cut costs, right, or raise
Mhm.
prices. Because we couldn't put more out there. We were already saturated. And so it's like, okay, well, these people, will customers still buy it if we raise prices 5%? I don't know. And in that case, sorry, I'm going on. It can be hard because companies look in their own lens. Well, I told the board I was going to grow 5%. I got to grow 5%. It's like, well, what if your don't customers don't care if you told your board you have to grow 5%? Are you going to
Right.
deliver the value for them? So that can be a really interesting challenge.
Yeah, for sure. But going back on like the mindset component of it, I think what's interesting and at least what we've seen within our agency is the more successful AI adopters are the ones that are looking at AI as not just a static investment, a one-time investment. They're really looking at it as an opportunity to kind of learn as a journey. It's the beginning of the transformation. It's the process of superhumanizing their current tasks and workflows. And it's really the ones who have that mindset are the ones that are able to quickly figure out what the value creation can be within their organization. Would
Yeah,
you
yeah.
agree with that? Like if your organization is not ready and culturally they're not, it's not going to work. Is that
Yeah, 100%. And there's a sequence to things, and I'm a big fan of lean startup, and I'm a big fan of crawl, walk, run. Like there's a sequence for doing these things, and some companies are more ready than others. But I like that term is superhumanize, as opposed to viewing it as another piece of technology. You view it as a thing that's kind of gives some of your best employees almost kind of superhuman powers of insight or reach or whatever. It just helps them be way more effective. And who wouldn't want to superhumanize their team, as opposed to, oh yeah, we're gonna replace you with AI.
right? I love that. This kind of reminds me of the next phase of this, right? Like really trying to assess your teams. And I think there was an interview in Giant Sales and Marketing Toolbox where you spoke about the importance of understanding your own company's strengths and preparing for future challenges. So what do you recommend as part of this? Like, how can a CEO or how can executives at an organization really have an honest assessment overall of what they're really, really good at and what they're not, to ensure that they can prepare for innovation such as AI or whatever the next innovation or technology that might be coming and disrupting what they're currently doing, but obviously for the better.
Yeah, it is, not an easy thing, that task. And I do think, and ironically, a company's greatest strength it can be the company's greatest strength for X number of years, can easily become um, a kind of a brittle weakness if you don't assess it properly. And so that's really sort of where the
Like, it reminds me of Netflix, right? Like
yeah.
Netflix, and they were dominating direct mail, but they knew streaming potentially could easily displace that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I have I don't know if you'll think it's a good story, but I have a story about that. So I was leading a business. Redbox and Coinstar were two leading automated, retail companies.
I remember they were at every 7-Eleven that I went into. I would see a red box.
Absolutely, and CVS and so on. And there was this period when they were just, exploding. But and ironically, Redbox had actually been incubated, not a lot of people know this, at McDonald's. McDonald's had a corporate innovation group, and they were trying to figure out how to bring more people into McDonald's restaurants at night. And they said, oh, well, people like movies at night. Maybe we can make it convenient. And so, so they ended up, and they put a really smart guy in charge of it. And he had and he iterated a bunch of times on it. And finally, they kind of got this format down, and they tested it a bunch, and then they figured out how to get market economics. So they figured out, okay, we don't want to have one of these in a bunch of different places. So they figured out how to get the whole market economics of picking up the CDs, returning the CDs, moving around, and they figured that out in Salt Lake City, and they had like 35. I mean, I know the guy who led that team, and they figured that was about 35 things, and then they said, okay, we are ready to go, and they just absolutely stepped on the gas and executed brilliantly. And then they wanted, but they knew that there were only some, that DVDs were a sunsetting format eventually, and that coins, there were probably going to be less coins over time to count. So they wanted to new forms of automated retail. So they brought in a number of entrepreneurs to try and work on new ideas. And they had an entrepreneur running a coffee kiosk business. And these were like our own little startups, coffee kiosk business, used electronics business, a kind of pharmaceuticals, not a beauty product sampling business. And then mine, because I know a bunch about gift cards, was a gift card exchange kiosk. And so I sort of ended up a quick story, I ended up building about 1,000 of these, bought $300 million worth of gift cards, and then they decided they didn't want to do that. So they sold that business actually to Blackhawk Network, where I've been a founder. So like one of my later businesses ended up selling to my first exit, which felt like a very Silicon Valley experience. But the Redbox people were smart, and they were like, oh, like streaming is coming. How do we do this? And Redbox was every bit as big and capable and had brand awareness as that Netflix did. But there was something, but they just kind of missed, and I think they would admit it. There was some risk of eating their own lunch and making a big capital investment that they didn't want to do. And so I remember they did a corporate announcement that they came up with streaming, and it was going to be Redbox Instant Live with Verizon. And we were kind of like, it's like, okay, not really sure. But Verizon had some assets. We tried to download the app, and nobody could get it to work. And it turned out, that in the desire to mitigate, capital expenditures and not make a big enough, and not make a big risk and protect the core business, they went too small. And right. Netflix, obviously, Netflix, they bet the company on streaming. But now it's been fascinating because Netflix was kind of on its, an incredibly well managed company, but now Netflix is kind of on its own. Just like, what are we? We're global. Are we doing our own stuff? We're competing with Disney. We're competing with Paramount.
Are we streaming? Are we a content house?
Yeah, it's like right. Yeah. Just like, and now they have like all the challenges of being Disney or Warner, Discovery, or any of these others. So it's fascinating. But I have huge respect for how Netflix, they got a bunch of data, they learned things, and they were willing to make some big bets at the right time, right? And I kind of talk about a lot about, let's make small bets, get data, small bets, get data. Very data, NetKits was a very data-driven company. And when they had that information, they made the bet that, frankly, the Redbox senior leadership did not.
Right.
And which is, I mean, and I know the Redbox, team well, super good, super smart people, but it's just kind of like, it was like, that was just a miss. I mean, they've all gone on to do other good things, but it would have been way more fun and interesting if they'd found a way to make a bigger bet.
And this is a great example of when innovation is there and everyone's kind of talking about it. If you put your head in the sand and actually don't act upon it, you can easily get disrupted within a few years, right? Within 2, 3, 4 years. Similar story for Blockbuster. Netflix did that there. Similar story with Amazon, how they were able to do that with Borders and Barnes and
Oh,
Noble.
yeah, right. I mean, and I'm probably guilty because I used to love to. You remember when they had like the big, Borders and Barnes and Noble books, and you'd go out to a mall, and Borders would be open late, and you'd kind of go in and you'd browse and you'd see some new books, and they'd have a cafe, and it was like,
You
oh,
know what my problem was? I knew there was an issue is when I was doing that, then I was scanning the barcode and buying it from Amazon while drinking the coffee. I'm like, this is not good for Borders, Barnes and
yes, right.
Noble.
That ended up, I mean, and it's kind of, it's an interesting thing, and now every company has to, because when I was leading the gift card mall, basically all retailers they had their own reference competitor, and then they had Walmart, right? Whether it was, Gap or Best Buy or, whoever it was, everybody had like, okay, we have a competitor, and then, well, of course, we got Walmart that we have to compete with. And yeah, and this was in the early 2000s, and Walmart was, a $500 billion, colossus that, looked like it was taking over grocery, taking over all retail, taking over everything. And it's still, a really well-run company, but Amazon took a bunch of stuff from them that Walmart would have never. It's just like, oh, that little book and CD company, that's like, they're not our competition. Target, maybe. Kroger, maybe. But Amazon, they're not our competition.
Right, exactly.
But anyway,
Let's kind of chat about, I mean, your leadership, and you've been in so many incredible industries and categories. You've had a lot of fantastic growth, and you built a unicorn. So you've been in e-commerce, fintech, climate tech. Um, in our work, we see principles that transcend industries, right? Like it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, that these same principles apply. What do you think are essential principles for CEOs to scale successful, regardless of what are table stakes for CEOs? What do they need to be able to have that can allow them to really grow and scale their organization?
well, that's a really interesting question, and I get and I'll answer it two ways. First, I think that CEOs need to, the smart CEOs, they focus on the stuff nobody else can do, like that only they can do, which is, really strategy and culture. What's the business we should be in, and how do we do what we do? And I think that's sort of, the culture. And then early on, CEOs need to do selling and fundraising. Like there's an element of that. So I think CEOs need to make sure that they put, well, I guess here's what I would say. The foundational principle is that CEOs should try to hire people as smart as or smarter than they are and put them in jobs they love. Um, and that if they can do that, and and encourage them to make intelligent risks and back them up when they make mistakes, uh, then I think that's a leadership principle that scales really well. But as far as like, there's a lot of different styles of leadership. There's micromanagers, there's strategic, visionaries. Uh, you know, Steve Jobs, one of the most amazing and successful CEOs in the history of technology. But I loved like the movie about Steve Jobs. They had him with an early conversation with Steve Wozniak, who's the one who actually built stuff.
Right.
And Jobs was, kind of opinionated, you know, sharing his opinions about some things. Woz was really frustrated. It's like, well, I don't want to listen to all this. I don't even know what you do. You're not a coder. You're not a marketer. It's like you don't do finance. What the hell do you even do here anyway? And Jobs, it's kind of like, he's like, I have great taste. And, right. I mean, and that's kind of that was ultimately his thing. He had great taste in technology. And I remember one of my technical co-founders who I adored, and like technical people for a long time really liked the Android platform because you could customize it and you could do stuff. And I got an Android phone, one time early on, and I was, trying to customize it and do this. I was like, oh, this is so confusing. And my friend, who was a CS major, thought it was all fine. And but eventually I said, it's like, you've got a lot of customizations and cool shortcuts and doodads and awesome things that you can do with your Android, phone, and that's great. He says, but Steve Jobs' vision of what a phone should be is pretty good. So I think I'm just going to live in Steve Jobs' world. And as far as so anyway, so as far as pivotal things, lots of different people, right? Steve Jobs is really different than Steve Gates, is really different than Jensen Huang, is different than Mark Zuckerberg, right? And that's just in tech. A lot of different styles. But I think key is hire really smart people, back them up, and put them in roles that they love and are good at.
I love that. So find the smart people, make sure you're enabling them, you're giving them the resources, the team, whatever they need in order to help execute. I heard a little bit about vision here and being able to provide guidance and culture and vision so everyone stays aligned. It sounded like in some elements of it, and get out of the way, right? Like really focus on the things that you can be focusing on, which could be culture and the dynamics of the team and making sure everyone is rowing in the same direction. Does that summarize it a little?
Yeah, and there's such a thing as founder mode, which is different than managerial mode. There's a lot of talk, on that. But I mean, some of the best CEOs I work with, that they kind of have this abstract idea that they want to be able to work, on the core business an hour a week. And as far as, and that sounds absurd, right? Because all these CEOs is like, they're responding to Slack messages at 10 o'clock at night and stuff. But conceptually, for the core business, if you hire the right people and empower them and push decision making into the organization, and you kind of have an hour meeting with the team, and the right numbers to look at, and you trust your people, then the CEO can a good CEO, I'd argue, can do that in an hour a week, and then they can work on culture strategy and new business stuff.
Right.
And I think that's really you were talking about scaling. I think that's the key when companies want to scale, is that the CEOs have to put really smart people and hold them accountable, give them decision-making authority, and kind of, hold them accountable and stay out of their way.
I love that. So give them the ability to control what's working and give them accountability on that, so they can start focusing on what's next, how we're going to get the next 20% growth or 15% growth or whatever the goals might be. Who do we need in order to do that? And then probably building off of some of the stuff you said earlier, what are the experiments we need to be running and who should be running those experiments to see if we can scale up here?
Yeah, right. And it's all those smart people need to be, bringing it back to the start, they need to be running their own little AI experiments in finance and operations and whatever their different, functional areas are, as opposed to, and maybe you have some you hire somebody from, Berkeley or MIT who's an AI specialist and they're advising the CEO on some stuff. Maybe you do that so you can be more informed, but generally, I don't think you want to have an AI czar who's deciding on the AI for everything, because they're going to be too abstract and not close enough to the operating, the core op people who are like running the business. So I think try to move that down, and right, because there's AI everywhere in the enterprise, right? I
Right.
mean, I don't know that anybody's. I'd actually argue nobody's figured out really how to leverage it for an extended thing. I think what people are doing now is they're making the bets to see who's going to really be succeeding like 3 to 5 years from now. But it's a big land grab, and people are trying stuff like crazy.
I 100% agree. Let's talk a little bit more now the opposite side of this coin, right? So we're talking about scaling growth, scaling it quickly, what's essential. We've seen at least and I'll give you kind of an example, and I think you talked about this a little bit as well in one of the episodes. You highlighted the risk of growing too fast without a solid foundation, and what we talk about is it's like a peach tree. If you've seen a baby peach tree where it's starting to grow, the branches are, the core branch might
Yep.
not be big enough yet to be able to
Yep.
support all the leaves and all the fruits that it
Yep.
could potentially give out. And if you let it and you don't trim it right, you will start breaking the main branch and it will start either going crooked or it won't get the strength that it needs, right? So that's the analogy we like to use. How do you guide CEOs who are experiencing the opposite side of this? They are getting hyper growth, right? They're starting to get 20%, 30% growth. Is there any guidance and advice you can give them and what they should be looking out for?
So one, I love that analogy about the peach tree. I grew up in Fresno in an agricultural area, and so I love that idea that you need to have the core trunk be strong enough to support things. And I love that. And look, there's a balance, um, because you don't want to grow too fast. But on the other hand, there's times where if you have a good idea, you want to run like crazy before, because there's going to be, some other smart people are saying like, ooh, that's a good idea. We should do that. And if you don't move quickly to kind of take as much of the market opportunity, somebody else will take it, or some entrenched competitor will launch that new thing. So there's a real balance, and I probably err on the side of growing faster. And if you have to come back and get up, it's like I think Reid Hoffman wrote Blitz Scaling about and kind of how to deal with this, and he's very, very smart guy. One of the stories he uses, like, okay, so I guess here's what I would say. It's and it relates to his. He talked about problems that are like brush fires. It's like, oh yeah, that's a brush fire that's smoldering. It's not good, but it's not going to kill us.
Right.
And given the capital and the other stuff, we're just kind of going to let that smolder for a while because we're focused on grabbing share. And so I think that's how I would say is I have a fairly high tolerance for brush fires. Having said that, you really have to make sure the core is strong and be really tightly focused on that. But when there's like, Blackhawk, where we started the gift card mall, I mean, that went from six cards in a grocery store, like that we didn't get in until November. We got a couple of million in sales. And like 4 years later, we were at 20,000 points of distribution, 80% market share, 500 million in revenue. And
Wow.
um, and I will, credit my boss, boss and mentor, Don Kingsbury. We were talking about how fast, what should we do? He's like, you keep signing. Go sign multi-year exclusive deals with, with everybody we want, and we will
Right.
figure out how to do it. Because there's some times when you got to just surge and step on the gas, because we were, I wouldn't say terrified, but we didn't want Albertsons and Kroger and HEB, and there were a bunch of other grocers who could have done this. We wanted everybody to have to do this. And so when it turned out to be perfect, we signed multi-year exclusive deals that weren't coterminous. So the deals didn't end at the same time. So nobody could do this. And so when these other big players said, oh, these things that are kind of being in Safeway stores, and Blackhawk was incubated as a new business at Safeway before we spun it out. And they started calling our best retailers. They started calling Gap and Starbucks and Home Depot and Best Buy and a bunch of others. And these companies said, "Oh, well, thank you." It's like, "Oh yeah, we have a multi-year exclusive deal with Blackhawk for all grocery." And
so for people who don't know, Blackhawk, what did it do exactly? You guys had the gift cards at the stores?
We do all the gift cards. If you've ever been to a grocery store in the US at least, there's an end cap.
It's where I go right before a birthday. We forgot to get a gift. Let's run to the grocery store because there's a gift card there.
It's super convenient. And so in that case, we just rolled up all the best real estate. Like if the best real estate is available and you can get it, by hook and by crook, go out and get it. And then you can operationally catch up. So I have a bias for that. The thing I will say, and this is personal lesson learned, is when you're growing that fast, one thing to really pay attention to is personal and institutional hubris. So if things are going really well, there's this confidence of success can lead to arrogance. And I certainly think we went over that line sometimes. And so that's one of the things that
to stay humble, right?
Stay humble, stay hungry. I mean, stay humble, stay hungry. However, much if you have, I mean, and I was at companies that we would grow 200, 300, 400% a year, which is super fun. But it carries its own risks. And so to me, focus on making the core strong and stay humble and hungry. It's like these opportunities to do hypergrowth don't come around that often in anybody's career. If you have that, really enjoy it, stay humble, and like you said, keep the core strong.
I love that. Let's end with that. And Walter, I know you're an executive coach. You also you're also a chair at Vistage with several groups. And if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way that they can reach out and contact you?
So you can email me. I think, let's see. Yeah, walter.paulsen@vistagechair.com, or just connect with me or DM me on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
And always interested in talking to CEOs and people who are hungry and want to grow. And I truly love this work. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you today. Really enjoyed it.
Of course. We'll add that to the show notes for the listening audience. Walter, thank you so much for an insightful conversation today's discussion on AI, resilience, leadership, and giving us a roadmap for navigating today's high, fast-paced, tech-driven landscape. You shared so many strategies and just about implementing new technologies, but about leading with foresight, balance, and a commitment to long-term success. For our listeners, I hope you gained as much as I have from Walter's approach to leading with innovation while staying grounded on sustainable practices. This episode has been packed with actionable insights to any CEO, founder, or aspiring leader applied to drive growth and building stronger future steady organizations. To everyone who joined us, thank you for tuning in on a Growth Ventures podcast. If you found today's episodes insightful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. And as always, stay curious, stay resilient, keep leading with vision. Walter, any last words of wisdom before we wrap up?
No, I just want to share how much I really enjoyed the conversation and the way you framed both the challenges and the opportunities around AI and growth and executive leadership. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Hamlet.
Thank you, Walter. Have a great day, everyone.